Welcome to Plastic Model Mojo, a podcast dedicated to scale modeling, as well as the news and events around the hobby, where we hope to be informative and entertaining and help you keep your modeling mojo alive. Dave, it's Plastic Model Mojo time again, and it's time for episode 56. Wow.
Yep. I'm telling you, man. When I was saving the outline and I looked back, I could not believe this was the 56th one we've done. It's amazing.
Oh, we just did 50, seemed like.
I know.
Well, how you been? I think I know, but our listeners don't.
My model sphere was coming out of the dark age or the dark time, and actually I got a lot of juice in my veins. I was very gung-ho. I'm making progress on several projects. I'm inspired for 2022. I've got a lot of goals, a lot of things I want to do, which we'll talk about later in the episode. But then COVID hit the household. You'll hear me talk about it a little later when we do our interview with Dr. Miller. But COVID hit our household. Luckily, we're all vaccinated. We're all healthy, no comorbidities. And for all of us, it was nothing more than a very, very mild cold. But the one thing that did make you was a little bit tired. So my modeling's been kind of reduced for the last week or so. But we're all on the upside. And didn't have any huge long-term effect. I did manage to get a little model-related reading done. So all in all, as lucky as we can be. How about you?
Well, the tests say I didn't have COVID, but I was sick for about a week. My son brought something home from school and all negative tests, multiple tests, but I don't know, man. I don't tests say no, but my intuition says maybe, because they weren't they were home tests. So.
Right. They weren't the PCRs, which by the way, I got one of those, man, where they tickle the back of your brain.
Yeah.
Oh my Lord. Oh, that was no fun.
Well, you're starting to sound like Dave again.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. The one advantage of getting the congestion that's related to COVID is it gives me a little bit more of a radio voice. So enjoy it, everybody, while you have the opportunity.
Well, we aren't the only modeling podcast to get hit with this. So
yeah, true enough.
Well, I guess my model sphere is trying to keep my inspiration up, and I don't know. I tell you, this. Getting sick and we've had some weather that's put school out in our part of Kentucky, and I don't know, we're trying to just come out of the holiday break and we're just stumbling all over ourselves to have a normal week, and I don't know, man, it's just kind of rippled all through everything. But
well, we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves off, and recommit. We find the mojo, we persevere. You've been doing some great stuff. I mean, I've some of the stuff you've posted to our Facebook page, I've really been enjoying.
Well, keep watching the Facebook page because there'll be more.
I assume that. Oh, by the way, this is modeling fluid related. Now, I'm going to ask Mike in a second what his modeling fluid is. But let me tell you one secret in case you all out there don't know. Bourbon cures everything. And I'm not kidding. When I started to get symptoms on like Friday afternoon, Friday evening, I had a couple of stiff bourbons and I woke up feeling better Saturday and have continued that bourbon regimen every evening. And I'm getting better and better. Now, that may just be the natural course of the disease, but it also may be the bourbon, and I'm not taking any chances. So, Mike, what's your modeling fluid tonight?
Well, it's not bourbon.
Oh, you're killing me, man. No wonder you're feeling so bad for so long.
Well, no. I had some while I was sick. I used your same remedy there, but No, I'm on the cheap beer tonight, man. It's Narragansett Lager
Oh, okay.
in a pint can, so it might get me through the episode.
Well, that's not a bad. Now that's more usually something I'd associate with spring or summer out doing yard work, but it's not a bad beer. You have to tell us if it gets you through the episode.
Well, I'm sure it will, but we'll talk about that at the end. What is your medicine of choice tonight?
My medicine of choice tonight is Evan Williams 100 proof bottled in bond bourbon. Now, this is not a top shelf bourbon. Reason is, with COVID, recovering from COVID. Now, I never lost taste and smell completely, but because of the congestion and all, you do lose some sense of taste, some sense of smell. So while I was initially treating my COVID with the very fine bullet bourbon that I had left here at the house, when that was gone and I needed to replace it, I saw no point in going out and spending good money on mid-shelf or top-shelf bourbon, especially since I knew I was going to mix it with ginger ale. So I got myself some Evan Williams 100 proof bottled in bond, and it's mixed with Seagram's ginger ale, and it's going to get me through the episode just fine.
Well, that's good to hear, Dave. I hope you feel better, man.
I'm on the upside, and it was never that bad. Honest to God, I've had hay fevers that were worse than this.
Well, you're not the only thing on the up and up or on the mend. The mailbag rebounded quite well this past couple of weeks as well.
Had no doubt it would.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's kind of becoming our jam, I guess. Well, let's get into listener mail because there's some good stuff in here.
Yep.
I've got my glasses this week.
All right. He knew where they were.
First up tonight is John Paisano from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and he's written in before, but he actually comes to us this time with a discussion point, and he says a lot, but I'm gonna take this one bit. John likes to leave the smaller parts on the sprue and paint them, unless the subassembly can be done before painting all the parts of the same color, etc. He's experiencing what kind of always happens, I think, when you try to do it that way, is you kind of, no pun intended, you paint yourself into a corner.
Yeah.
Because you got all these small parts and you need to get the paint off the areas of the little parts that need to be bonded together.
Right.
And they can't be completely clean to paint, or they're so tiny that it's got concerns of ruining the parts by sanding them. And, while you're trying to clean them up, they get away from you and get lost, etc.
Yep. This is a challenge, man. I don't do it that way. No matter how small, I always take the part off the sprue before painting it for that very reason. But I know plenty of modelers who do it the way he describes it. This is one of those things where I think it's just, there are pluses and minuses with doing it either way. And you do what you like best.
I've never done it this way because the cleanup on small parts is hard enough.
Yes.
Without having to worry about paint.
Right.
And if you got to touch it up anyway. I don't know, John. I think I would practice a little more maybe on getting these subassemblies together that aren't the same color, and practice your detail painting.
Well, and let me tell you, I do think that brush detail painting is an underappreciated art. Sometimes I think we airbrush smaller parts because we think we have to, because we think that airbrushing is better than brush painting in all circumstances. And I don't think that's true. I mean, I'll tell you, over on 72nd Scale Forum, there are guys who brush paint entire models, and they produce stuff that you could not ever tell was a brush painted model. They have developed the skill of the hairy stick better than I would think possible. But I do think there's that at least some of us modelers get into the habit of thinking everything has to be airbrushed. And I don't think that's true, especially with the newer generation of paints. We all know that Tamiya doesn't brush paint very well, but with the Vallejos, with the new AK Gen 3s, stuff like that, I think you can do a lot of brush painting on detail parts and have it come out every bit as good, if not better, than if you had airbrushed it.
And when you do it a lot, you can kind of learn some tips. Like, I'm not sure what he's building here. It says 72nd scale aircraft and then some automobiles. Thinking that you need to harken back to kindergarten, thinking that you got to color between the lines all the time.
Yeah.
Quite often, like, I don't know, he's building small aircraft. So, for example, you've got a control column that the metal tube shaft on it is probably going to be chromate yellow or green or whatever, right?
Right.
And the grip's going to be dark gray or black or something like that. Paint the top of the thing dark gray without any concern over how far down the shaft it goes, and just come back and cut it in later.
Right.
And you don't get too wrapped around the axle about, thinking that you got to be so precise all the time. Now, sometimes you do.
Right.
But a lot of times you don't. And when you learn when you don't, you can really simplify things and take a lot of pressure off yourself, I think. But I think you said you don't do this either, and I don't do it as well. I don't do it. I tend to build things up as much as I can before I paint them.
Yeah. Well, one of the great tips I got out of the Diego Quinano series on modeling aircraft models was, one of his tips was when, like in cockpits or wheel wells, you have lines running, fuel lines or control lines or whatever running through the space. He paints them all black first and then goes back with the color that they're intended to be on top of that. And it leaves at the edge, if you do it right, and if you've got a steadier hand than I do, it leaves a black shadow at the edge, and it really makes it pop to stand out. And that's a place where, or that's a thing where you can do that brush painting. You can never do that airbrushing. So, I do think that sometimes we think that everything has to be airbrushed, and it doesn't.
Moving on, Jeff Kellerman, and Jeff does not give me a geography, and he's asking, is there a difference between KV and JS tracks, and what might it be?
Okay, Mike is going to give you a 5-minute disquisition while I sip on bourbon. Go ahead, Mike.
Actually, I'm not, because maybe I should know this, but specifically, I do not know this. Now, I strongly suspect that, yes, they are different, just because I really don't know the answer. I'm just going to say, yes, they're different. And how are they different? I'm not real sure. You're going to have to look at the nuances, the different tread patterns, make sure the widths are the same. Now, the KV tracks started really wide, like 700 millimeters, and they got narrower as the war progressed. And then when the later series KV-1S, when they tried to lighten the entire tank, they went to a different track that only had a guide tooth on every other plate. And then the plate that without the guide tooth is actually two pieces that butted together. So you actually had 3 track links instead of 2. If that makes sense.
Yep.
The 2 formed one, and the other one was the one with the tooth on it. The JS track is like that, but I'm not sure if it's the same smaller width that the later KV tracks were.
Well, that's an opportunity for one of our listeners out there. I guarantee you one of the folks listening knows the absolute answer to this, and I'm sure they're going to write in and tell us.
And clearly I don't know everything.
Well, you're not expected to know everything. You know more about Russian helmets than any human being on the planet should know.
Maybe. Maybe not.
No maybe about it.
Up next, Steven Schaefer from Hastings, Minnesota. But it's cold up there tonight.
Oh. God, it's going to be 9 degrees here tonight, or like 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Fun stuff, man.
Ugh. Hey, I'm living the South. I didn't sign up for this stuff.
Cold weather aside, Steven is more of a sci-fi and 48 scale, which he says the actual true scale aircraft builder.
Oh, Steven. I'll forgive you.
His local clubs, one of them, the Minnesota Military Figure Society, is doing a group build on armored cars.
Great choice.
And he's decided to stretch the definition a bit, and he's building Ryfield's models M1240A1. It's an MATV, so I guess it's an armored. It's an armored car, I'd say, but it's one of those up armored. Used to be soft skin until we got into guerrilla warfare kind of things. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
He sent a lot of body off photographs, and there's a lot to this kit. His point being, though, it's definitely outside his comfort zone. It's been a very enjoyable build.
And I love armored cars. I'm a big fan, especially all this World War I stuff that's been going on. But I'm now even warming up to some of the World War II stuff that's coming out. And, building outside your comfort zone it's the way to go, man. I'll tell you what, especially if don't get AMS, don't get advanced modeler syndrome. If you're building outside of your comfort zone, take the model as it comes in the box, build it for the enjoyment of building it as it comes out of the box. It doesn't have to be perfected. This isn't your major area of building. So you're doing it to enjoy it. You're doing it to find the enjoyment from that. So don't let it devolve into a super detail project. Just build it, enjoy it, and I guarantee you building something outside your comfort zone will bring you a lot of mojo.
Well, this next one's interesting, Dave.
All right, I'm up for interesting.
It comes to us from Rick Cooper from Fresno, California. And it's a kind of a different take on this whole conversation we had last time. I think, who were you talking to on Facebook Messenger? John Bryan.
Yeah.
About the 30-minute
right
work limitation, the wall of 30 minutes.
Yep.
Well, what Rick's done over the years is he's kept a lot of small generic kind of things close at hand, like ammo crates and water cans and oil cans.
I was going to mention this. This is a fantastic idea.
Did I copy you on this?
No, you didn't. Well, you may have. You know what my email looks like, some sort of sewer. So,
well, he keeps all these smalls close at hand and some CA or, cement of some kind and his primer. And he's built up all this stuff, and he'll prime it. And then the next time he's got his airbrush fired up with any appropriate color, he'll paint some of it.
Yeah.
And then he'll use this stuff to practice his weathering on.
Well, and this is a fantastic idea for aircraft modelers, particularly. It applies to World War II, but particularly more modern aircraft. Ordnance on more modern aircraft, you have all these different types of missiles, all these different types of bombs, rocket pods, etc. And what is a great idea, and I've done it in the past, and frankly, I've kind of gotten away from it, and I need to get back to it because, again, this is a great idea. If you're sitting down at the bench and you've got 30 minutes, build some ordnance. And what you do is you build that ordnance, you prime it, you do what you can in 30 minutes. Every time you build up some ordnance, you then, when you get completed ordnance, you put decals on it, whatever, you put it away, marked as what it is. And then when you're building a project that uses that ordnance, You've already got it ready made, because what happens, you go walk along a lot of convention tables and you'll see a lot of modern aircraft without a lot of ordnance under them, because what happens is by the time the modeler gets to the ordnance, which is at the end of the build, after they've got the model basically quote unquote done, they're tired of it.
Yeah, they're done too.
They're done. And so you'll see a lot of jets with a lot of stuff not hanging off them, empty pylons or whatever. It is a great idea if you've got those 30-minute bursts and you can't do anything else, to build ordnance, to paint it, decal it, put it away, and over time build up a stock of that stuff that you have ready access to, so that when you're working on the model that calls for that ordnance and you're at the end of the build and you're done, you want it off the table, you want to move on, but you really don't want to just leave it naked. You don't have to put a lot of extra time, because all you have to do is reach up, grab the ordnance that you've already pre-done, hang it, and move on. And this is a fantastic idea, and I should have mentioned it earlier.
That's exactly what he does, but he comes at it from the armor-centric side of modeling. 35th scale armor is his jam. And, he finishes these up, pops them off his little prop he's used to paint them on, and puts them in a box.
Yep. Jerry cans, all the stuff that hangs on the back of tanks, backpacks, duffel bags, any of that sort of stuff. Same idea, exactly.
So now he can personalize a project without it slowing him down.
Yep, this is a fantastic idea, and I feel bad for not having mentioned that in my conversation with John Bryant, because that is a really great way to deal with the 30-minute modeling session.
And Rick closes saying that now I'm retired and has really come in handy as I'm able to use all those crates, cans, boxes, etc. that I've built up during my working years when time was at a premium.
Yeah.
See you in Omaha.
All right. I'm looking forward.
All right. This one's interesting too. Scott Stakowiak from Saginaw, Michigan, from the IPMS Mid-Michigan Model Makers.
Way up there.
Well, midway up there.
Midway up there. He's not in the UP, but he's up there.
Kind of keying off our conversation about that Airfix Lee and Grant I bought, and why you couldn't get one versus the other, and
right.
Kind of segued into, you always hear that some venerable old kit is still holding its own or whatever. Maybe it's the shape's better or something like that than the current offerings. He asks, while newer kits benefit from modern engineering, are there any vintage kits that still hold their own due to shape, fit, or availability?
I'm sure there are, and I'm sure our listeners can tell us one. But in general, in this day and age, I really am of the opinion that, CAD and all of the stuff, the new techniques with mold cutting, the new techniques with the different types of slide molds, etc. One of the reasons I'm convinced that people getting into the hobby today have it so much better than we did when we got into the hobby is, in general, kits fit better than they ever have. And I'm sure there's an exception to every rule, but in general, I think that when you're faced with the choice of kits on the same subject, the rule is buy the most recent molding, the most current release of an item, because I think that the odds are great that it's going to be the better kit and the better fitting kit and the better assembling kit.
Well, I know of one shape-wise that was completely true for a while. Now it's still half true.
Okay. Hit me.
A short wing B-26 Marauder in 72nd scale.
Oh, well, God. We need a brand new one.
Elaborate for our listeners.
Okay. A monogram the early B-26 used it midway, the short wing early B-26.
The Widowmaker.
The Widowmaker, right. Before they figured out, let's give these, if we're going to hang this powerful an engine on these things, let's give them a little more wing and some other stuff too. Kit's really only been represented twice. One, the old monogram snap tight kit in 72nd scale. And then Valome released a short run injection version of the thing. While the Valome short run injection version of the thing was released, I'm going to bet 30 years after the monogram snap tight, it is not, it's somewhat of an improvement, but not a great improvement. And actually, the best way to deal with that, if you're trying to do this, and if you are, God bless you. I know Chris Buckholtz at Obscurico is actually doing one of these things as a long-term project. The best thing to do is to start with the monogram snap tight kit and then use bits and pieces of the Valome kit to try and make it better. And if you're doing this, I bless you, because as soon as you get 90 to 92% done with this project, Tamiya will announce a 72nd scale short wing B-26, and we're all the rest of us are going to owe you a great debt of gratitude. And that is the way it works, man. It is true. There is some modeler out there who's pouring his heart and soul into making some dog of a kit acceptable. And the moment he gets close, that's when somebody announces a brand new injection kit. It's called throwing yourself on a model.
That's right. Well, we digress a little there. I don't know any other examples, really.
I can't think of any, but I'm sure there are some, and I'm sure that there's somebody out there who's going to email us and say, oh, by the way, the X kit from the 1970s is a better version of X than anything that's been produced since.
Danny Saint Laurent from Quebec City in Canada. Just a quick note with a funny picture. We'll maybe put that on the Facebook page if he thinks that's okay. I guess we made his day, because it looks like he got his prize stencil sample pack and the stuff you sent him for being a contributor the same day.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Great.
I don't know. All right. We made his day.
That's our goal, man.
That's right. Well, you make ours, Danny.
If we can make people happy, again, if we can get people's mojo flowing and make them happy, you know what? I'm going to consider that a life well lived.
Dwayne Bagley, no geography, but a 517 area code. So I'm thinking he's in Michigan too.
Yeah, 517's got to be Michigan.
This one's for you, Dave. And I'm all ears because I want to know as well. Wondering if you could recommend an assembly jig for 172nd scale aircraft. I'm getting back into the hobby, and I was wondering if you knew of one that stands out.
Yes, absolutely. And I can tell you, it is by a company called Vertigo. Or the product is called Vertigo. I don't know if the company's called Vertigo. Vertigo. I know that UMM USA carries these. I don't know. I ordered mine actually directly from the manufacturer because I've owned a number of assembly jigs, and all have had their flaws, all have had their pluses and minuses. And I've always thought, what we need is one made out of acrylic. Fairly thick acrylic. And I happened to be on the internet one day, and here was a guy displaying his model halfway finished, and it was on an acrylic assembly jig. And I was like, holy heck, what is that? And I zoomed in on the picture, and I could see the name on which luckily they had laser engraved on the acrylic. And so with a little bit of Googling, I found it and ordered it direct. It was somewhere out of Eastern Europe. And it is by far the best assembly jig that is out there, because it's acrylic, because it is substantial, it's solid. A lot of assembly jigs, the ones that are made from laser cut balsa or laser cut wood, they don't quite hold up. Although I will tell you, I have one again that I got from USA, UMM USA, Mr. Wojtek, that I still use for painting, because I don't want to paint my on my Vertigo and then have to try and clean the paint off. I like the acrylic clear, and it's got measurements and everything on it, and I don't want to obscure those. But I highly recommend the Vertigo acrylic aircraft assembly jigs. They make it for both single wing aircraft. They also make a version for biplanes. I actually own both. I have yet to use the one for biplanes because I am a complete and utter coward, and I will overcome that at some point before I die.
Well, I hope so. All right. Well, we need to find a link to that, a source for that, and get that up.
I'll find that. I really will.
All right. We got another one.
Okay.
Arthur Vicente Guaranazo from São José dos Pinhais in Brazil.
Okay.
How's my Portuguese?
I have no clue.
Well, I'm just thrilled that someone from Brazil listens to our show, because I know English is not Arthur's first language.
Well, that's kind of funny, because I just sent a set of decals to Brazil.
Okay.
Off of the 72nd Scale Aircraft Forum. And by the way, I found a link. I will shoot it to you.
Okay. Art, we will get back with you. He'll send us a fairly lengthy email with a lot of points. I'll forward this to you, Dave, because it just came today, this afternoon. So he's want to talk a little bit about podcasting. He's maybe wants to do that, or the YouTube channel, or both. And I don't know if he means in his native language or what. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
I bet I'm sure there's not one.
I don't know. That's a great question, if there is. And Portuguese is a language that's more widespread than people realize.
Well, Art, thank you for listening all the way down in Brazil. That's a long way from Lexington, Kentucky, and Louisville too, for that matter.
Yep.
And happy modeling, man. Thanks for the listener mail, and I will get back to you on your podcasting points.
Mike has provided many of the current podcasters out there with hints and tips and tricks, so he's more than willing to share.
Well, my last one tonight came via text message from our guest last episode, Brandon Jacob, and apparently Winter Blitz was a nice success.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Winter Blitz was a success is an understatement. We had 45 contestants and over 250 models to judge. Now, remember, this show was armor centric with a few figures.
Right.
So that ain't bad.
No, that for the first time it's held by a guy who just drove by a museum and went, "Hey, this is an idea. Let's do it." I mean, that's kind of like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney going, "Hey, let's hold a dance in the barn," or whatever.
He says there were many positive comments. It was all very exciting, and he had three people approach him and say they were there because they heard him talking about it on our podcast on Plastic Model Mojo.
That's awesome.
He says that was unbelievably cool, and he just wanted us to know that people are listening. Well, Brandon, glad it was a success. And he also sent me a YouTube show report from an attendee, which I've posted to our Facebook page, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. You can kind of get a feel for what was going on. He sent me a lot of photos, which I'm going to post to the Facebook page as well. As soon as possible. But that's all the listener mail that came via email and my text messaging service.
Listen, that is fantastic. The more model contests, the better. And folks who model but don't go to contests, let me urge you, even if you're not going to enter in a contest, go, because it is a great place. You're gathered with tens or hundreds of other people who love the exact same things you do. And I guarantee you will show up and you will not meet strangers. You will meet friends who are just the same people that you are. And I look forward to all the model contests I go to because I know I'm going to see people who I interact with, but the only time I get to see them is at model contests. If you're just modeling, even if you're just modeling and going to the local club, but you're not going to a contest, you're missing a part of the modeling experience. You really are. And I'm not, you don't have to enter. You don't, I know a lot of folks aren't into competition. I know a lot of people think, oh, well, my model's not good enough, which generally is not true. But regardless of whether you want to enter, with whether you want to compete or anything like that, forget all of that. Go to a contest and talk to other modelers. You'll have the time of your life.
You got any others, Dave, from Facebook or anything?
Well, no, I've got one, but I'm going to mention it down here a little bit later. Right now, I want to remind everybody that they're listening to Plastic Model Mojo. And if you're listening and you like what you're hearing, please go on whatever podcasting app that you listen to us on and rate us. We'd like 5 stars. It helps with driving the visibility of the podcast. Also, more importantly, if you're a modeler and you have friends who are modelers, guys that you talk with all the time, the guys that you share your modeling with who aren't listening, please share the podcast with them. The way we get new modelers or new listeners is word of mouth, is people telling their friends, hey, this is good, listen to this. So you might have to help them. You might have to show them how to download a podcasting app. Please help your friends do that. Help them become listeners. And also subscribe to the podcast if you have not, because that also helps drive the visibility of the podcast.
Well, and please check out our other friends out there on the web and on the podcast airwaves, if you will. There's a lot of podcasts out there. You can fill up your modeling weeks with a lot of good content. And if you want to find it all in one click, go to modelpodcast.com. It's a consortium website we've set up to provide links to all the podcasts who are willing to participate in that for all our mutual benefit. In addition to the podcast, we've got a lot of blog and YouTube friends out there. We've got Mr. Stephen Lee with Sprue Pie with Frets and his blog. Chris Wallace, a model airplane maker, with his blog and YouTube channel. Jeff Groves, the Inchai guy, his All Things 72nd Scale blog. And Jim Bates, a Scale Canadian TV, and his wonderful little show, Scale Canadian TV, on YouTube. Please check out all those guys. They've got some good stuff, some good content, some funny content, some inspiring content, just a lot of great stuff to keep you motivated.
Finally, I would like everybody, if you're not a member of IPMS USA or IPMS Canada or the national chapter of whatever IPMS organization in the country that you're in, please consider becoming a member of the national organization. It really helps IPMS worldwide. Does a lot for modeling. There's a lot of interactions between the national organizations. The organizations do a lot in modeling as far as relation to manufacturers in order to help people form local modeling clubs. I want to give a special thank you to Greg Williams, who Facebook messengered me today, telling me that due to his listening to our episodes, and he went back and started at the beginning. He's on episode 22, so he's got a lot to catch up on. He joined IPMS USA. He lives in basically a little west of Dayton, Ohio, which I consider very lucky for him because he's close to the U.S. Air Force Museum, which is one of the great aircraft museums on the planet. But he Facebook messengered me to tell me that he had joined IPMS USA, and I really appreciate that. If you're listening and you haven't joined, please join. We're an organization that's getting stronger and better. And the more people we have, the stronger and better we'll get. So thank you all.
Well, all right, Dave. Let's take a minute here from a word from our sponsor and our guest, Model Paint Solutions.
All right.
Plastic Model Mojo is now brought to you by Model Paint Solutions, your source for Harder Steenbeck airbrushes, David Union power tools, and laboratory-grade mixing, measuring, and storage tools for use with all your model paints, be they acrylic, enamels, or lacquers. Check them out at www.modelpaintsolutions.com. Well, we're back, Dave, and it is Wagon's Ho for Omaha.
I cannot tell you how excited I am for Omaha. Having attended the last 2 conventions there, I know what a great job these guys do. I am super pumped to get to Omaha.
Well, at the time of this recording, Dave, it is 175 days away.
Wow, time is flying.
I know, it's clipping off quick.
Yes, it is.
And I talked to Scott Hackney via email this week, and you remind us that registration opens February 1st, and they are working hard to have everything ready to go so folks can register for the convention and sign up for tours and buy a t-shirt, etc. Not everything may be available on February 1st. Some of the workshops are still being put together by the sponsors, that kind of thing. So,
sure.
It's going to kick off first, and you need to get everything you can get on the 1st.
Absolutely. Because stuff goes, and some of these things, once it's sold out, it's sold out. So go get it when it becomes available.
The 2 attached hotels remain full. That's no surprise.
Yep.
He says there's a hotel across the street with a great rate. Comfort Suites also has a rate of $154 plus tax, but he's saying that was not a real convenient walk. But if you're driving, it'll be a great choice if you don't have a room yet. So Scott's given us a link, and I'll put that in the show notes and possibly put that on the Facebook page as well.
Yep.
They've sent out the call for seminars just this week from a mailing list he's got, and he's received a lot of replies. So if anybody in the audience is interested in putting on a seminar, just have him. He wants you to reach out to the show folks there at Omaha, and they'll get you set up. Now, I know thanks to the Posse crew and John Bonani, we're going to be doing the podcast meet and greet again, and possibly something else as well. And I know some of those guys have got some seminars they're going to do as well.
Yep. Listen, I said this when I was talking about Vegas. Seminars are the underappreciated gold nugget of IPMS USA national conventions. I mean, you can watch a YouTube video all you want. You can read articles all you want. This is your opportunity to go and watch in person, go listen in person, go ask questions. It's interactive. Some of my best memories of 25 plus national conventions are the seminars. Little tip for you: if you see Dana Bell giving a seminar on anything, go and attend that seminar. I guarantee you it will be something that you will remember the rest of your life. And there are a lot of other guys too. I know Dr. Miller usually puts on a seminar, and if he is, go to that, because John is a magician with an airbrush, and it is really worth seeing and worth hearing him talk in person and worth interacting with him one-on-one on that subject.
That's our update for the show. Keep that February 1st date in mind, and get yourself signed up when that rolls around, because that's going to be just a couple days after this episode drops.
Yep, absolutely.
Wow, I didn't realize that till I just stopped to think about it for a second.
Yep, time flies, man. How the hell did we get this old?
I don't know, man, but we are.
I know. The days are long. The years are quick. It's unbelievable.
Well, we've alluded to it already, but our special segment tonight is Dr. John Miller, Dr. Strangebrush, and the Dr. Strangebrush files. And we're going to get right into that and see what he's got to say out on a few topics. Well, Dave, it is a new year, and we are going to kick off a new adventure with Dr. Strangebrush. John, welcome back. How you doing?
Thank you much. Appreciate it. Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm great. Dave, not so much.
Well, I'd feel fine. Unfortunately, 72nd scale Nirvana was hit COVID, starting with my wife and then my oldest daughter and finally myself. Luckily for all three of us, we're fully vaccinated. So for each of us, it turned out to be nothing more than a cold. So, I mean, I've had hay fevers worse than this. So at least for our household, it's worked out really well. Although it has, for the last 4 or 5 days, cut into my modeling time a little.
Oh, that's serious.
Yeah,
That is,
I know.
Well, we hope you feel better, but
well, after this, I'm invincible, man.
Well, you don't have to carry the water this episode, so we'll give you a break.
I'll carry the bourbon. That's
fine. Well, John, let's get right into this. We've got a few topics here. One of them's a question you say you'd like to offer some clarity on, so maybe it doesn't come around so often. Let's just jump right into that one, and it is air bubbles in your paint cup.
Yep. Well, not my paint cup, but anybody's paint cup.
Well, actually, it's funny that John, before we started, was talking about how often he gets this inquiry and this problem. And it's funny because I'm actually one of the people that made the inquiry because I had this particular issue.
You were the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back.
Probably so. And man, his advice, he was absolutely 100% right. Cured it. So, John, enlighten us all.
So I get this at least twice a week.
Wow.
And I get it so often that I've actually made one of those form letter email, templates that has all the, specifics already typed out so that it's easy. It saves so much time as opposed to doing it de novo every time. And what it is bubbles in the paint cup. And it is not necessarily a Harder-Steenbeck issue. Most airbrushes, most double action airbrushes are all set up pretty much the same with regards to how the air galleys work inside the brush. And when you get bubbles in the paint cup, the cause for that is about the same in a Harder-Steenbeck as well as an Iwata or a Badger or a Pache or a Master class brush. And so because all these brushes share similar air galley design, they have the same idiosyncrasy. So when you get bubbles in the paint cup, what 99% of the time what that is actually a leak at either the air cap where the air cap seals to the airbrush main body, or there is a leak where the nozzle seals to the airbrush. Now with the Harder-Steenbeck, you have a black O-ring under the air cap and you have a white Teflon seal underneath the nozzle. So one of those two things can go bad and cause a leak and then give you bubbles in the paint cup. So if you're using a Harder-Steenbeck and you get bubbles in the paint cup, first thing you want to do is unchuck the needle, pull the needle back so you don't crash the nozzle into the needle when you tighten it, and then tighten that air cap down. And then reset your needle and see if the bubbles go away.
And that was absolutely the cure in my case. I mean, it was amazing. I cleaned the brush. I did everything thinking that there was a blockage somewhere.
Right.
And there wasn't a blockage. It was, and it seemed like the nose piece was tight, but it clearly just was not quite tight enough.
And, what's insidious about this is, guys will develop, air bubbles in the paint cup. They think intuitively, well, clearly there's something blocking flow of air and paint from the paint cup to the nozzle. So it's the nozzle that's clogged. So intuitively, I have to break the brush down and clean it. And when they do, oftentimes they don't find a demonstrable clog or, a demonstrable reason that the brush was clogged. They'll reassemble the brush. And when they do, they'll tighten everything just a little bit more. And when they tighten it a little bit more, the bubbles go away and they make the assumption that, there was a clog and I got it out. And that's not necessarily the case. So if after you tighten that air cap, you're still getting bubbles in the air cup, in the paint cup, then you have to think about, okay, maybe the black rubber O-ring underneath the air cap has gone bad. And if you're shooting lacquers, that black rubber O-ring, any brush that uses a black rubber O-ring underneath the air cap, if that's exposed to lacquer directly, it will break the rubber down and the O-ring will go bad. Now, keep in mind, you can shoot lacquer through Harder Steenbeck and other brushes that use rubber O-rings all day long, because normally the lacquer doesn't actually see that black rubber O-ring. It only sees it when lacquer is splashed onto the brush, or even worse, when the air cap is removed from the airbrush and soaked in lacquer thinner with the rubber O-ring on it. And that will for sure kill that O-ring. So if you look at the O-ring and it looks tattered, you can buy those O-rings. They come 3 in a bag for like $4. It's good to have a spare set, in your kit bag. The other place to look again is with a Harder Steenbeck brush is the white nylon seal on the bottom of the nozzle, the brass nozzle, which slips into the air cap with a Harder Steenbeck. Those white Teflon seals are replaceable. They pop right off with an X-Acto blade, and they pop right back on with your finger.
Badgers have the exact same thing too.
Yeah, and again, replaceable. So with those situations, if tightening the air cap doesn't fix the problem, then the next step is I have to replace either the O-ring or the nozzle seals in order to fix it. Now, what if you have a brush like an Iwata that has the nozzles that screw into the air cap? In that case, sometimes what you got to do is get your little wrench out and just, put a few more foot-pounds of torque onto that nozzle, fitting into the main body there. If that doesn't do it, you can also, and this is where beeswax comes into play. And a lot of guys have heard, the old tricks of sealing an airbrush up with beeswax. This is one instance where it's probably a handy trick to have in up your sleeve. Again, if you're dealing with an Iwata or an Iwata style brush like a Master, you've got the threaded nozzles. Sometimes a little bit of beeswax on those threads before you put the nozzle in will go a long way to sealing that nozzle to the airbrush and get rid of the the bubbles in the paint cup.
I hadn't heard of that trick. That's interesting. Yeah,
you can also use the beeswax. You can use beeswax anywhere where you've got threads and you want to seal it. And then, of course, this is in lieu of changing the O-ring out or changing the seal out, because, of course, that's the best thing. The best thing is to just fix the brush.
Well, I think that's where we were last time you were on. I think we talked about beeswax a little bit, and that's kind of what you said then. It's fix it. Yeah.
Fix it and try not to use the beeswax. But sometimes, especially if you're dealing with a brush, again, like an Iwata, where you've got those threaded nozzles, and those little threads give out with time. I'm sure everybody has experienced it. You get a little wobble in the nozzle when you start putting it in. Those threads are wearing. Sometimes beeswax will go a long way to getting a couple of more hours out of that nozzle before you finally have to replace it. So anyway, that's it. Bubbles in the paint cup. It's not necessarily a clog. It might simply be that your air cap and or your nozzle are not tight enough.
Before we went hot, I asked if this might be brand specific, and you said generally no. But let me tell you what prompted that question, and maybe it just gets back into what you're saying more in a at a higher level. But on a Badger airbrush, if you split the little brass nozzle extension, on the nozzle, it'll do this.
Yes.
So I was wondering if maybe, that's kind of unique to Badger, that little extra. You used to be able to buy them separately. I don't know if you still can, but they're kind of hard to replace.
I don't know. I don't know if you can either. I've not seen them. But yes.
You can. You actually can buy them separately, but God, they're microscopic. But they're actually very easy to replace. I've managed to split one a long time ago, and it was a very, very simple fix.
I just had a brand new Pache double action in the shop. A customer brought it to me. He had bought it offline and brand new, and was having some issues with it. Brought it to the shop, and even with this Pache, the issue was the air cap simply was not tight enough, and the amount of foot-pounds we had to put on this thing in order to tighten it was a little unreal. But once it was tightened down, the brush worked beautifully. So Pache is another one that you can add to that category.
Well, we've covered a lot of them then. That's about all the major players that you can buy right now.
Yep,
really.
yep, pretty much. So that was the first quick one there, Bubbles in the Paint Cup. The second one I wanted to touch on was something that we discussed briefly the last time I was on the show, which was the use of Liquitex Flow Aid and Slow Dry. And as I recall, it was the question that was being answered at the time was, what is the difference between Liquitex Flow Aid and Slow Dry? And we discussed, the differences then. I had been working for a while to get both of those reagents onto Model Paint Solutions. And I have finally found a distributor that can get them to me at a reasonable price so I can put them on the site at a reasonable price. And both the Flow Aid and the Slow Dry will be on the site next week. And if you go back to even the very first article I wrote for Model Paint Solutions, when it was just a wee baby company, and I had not brought any paint brands on board yet. I was simply a very small, website focused on measuring tools and Harder Steenbeck airbrushes. No paint. Paint wasn't even, really on the front burner at that point. Yet when you look at those first articles talking about using Vallejo and Life Color and Model Master acrylics, there it is right there in black and white, Liquitex Flow Aid, 5 to 10% by volume. The reason I bring that up is I've been using these two reagents for about 20 years. And I use them in practically every acrylic paint or primer that I use. And they make a world's difference between having an acrylic that shoots in a mannerly, reproducible, reliable way and having one that's just a real bear every time you go to use it. It's more trial and error than anything else. So that being the case, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on Liquitex Flow Aid and Slow Dry. And to do that, I wanted to tell what I'm calling the adventure in high altitude airbrushing. It's a parable, if you will. But this story really illustrates the utility of the Liquitex products in taming acrylic paints. So in 2019, I was asked by IPMS Denver, Rob Wolf chapter, and the folks at Colpar's Hobbytown to fly out to Denver to do a airbrush demonstration there at Colpar's. And I want to...
which, by the way, is one of the great hobby shops in the United States. I happened to be out on a business trip and went to Colpar, and boy, was that impressive.
Yep, and there's some really nice people. And when I was a wee baby modeler, I always remember seeing the Colpar's hobby ads in the back of Fine Scale Modeler.
Yep.
They were one of the first ones to have resin and, aftermarket. I mean, they were always a little ahead. So anyway, I jumped at the chance to go to Colpar's. And I also want to give a quick shout out to John Taylor, who is with the Rob Wolf IPMS Denver chapter for helping coordinate and make this whole thing work well. I hope you do well, John. So preparatory to going out there, I put my Infinity and a selection of acrylic paints and thinners, as well as two 20 mil bottles, each with Liquitex Flow Aid and Liquitex Slow Dry in my luggage, flew to the Mile High City and sat down at Colpar's hobby shop with all my stuff there, and with about, I'd say, 25 to 30 guys who had shown up to see the demonstration. And I mixed up my paint the way I normally do and dialed in my pressure the way I normally do, and went to dial in about a 1 millimeter wide line and got nothing but a spitting, spattering mess. And I just couldn't believe it, because I had never seen my mix, my dilution that I'd used for years and years and years, behave like that. I just had not seen it before. So anyway, that was a bit of an eye opener, and all the guys were kind of chuckling, going, well, he's having some issues today," and I was. So I cleaned the brush and got all the gooed up paint out of it, And the first thing I noticed is that when I set the air pressure for something that would be comparable to 10 or 12 pounds in sea level Seattle, I was dialed in to about 25 to 30 pounds. And I couldn't believe that because the difference is, huge. That's 10 to 12 pounds more. And I asked all the, the guys there in the store, I said, when you have enough airflow to get, this kind of spray, what are your gauges showing? And they all, raised their hand when 25, 30 pounds came up. So right there's a difference, because at sea level Seattle, where I'm now, or where I grew up, sea level Florida, I would never dial my compressor up to 30 pounds. But because of, density, altitude, and a whole bunch of things that are going to go beyond, this conversation, getting into the physics of compressors and pressure gauges, right there, if you're airbrushing at a higher altitude than normal, higher above sea level, you're going to have to be running your compressor at a higher PSI than you would at sea level. So that was the first eye opener. Second thing is, in order to get the paint to shoot in a comparable way as it does in, again, sea level Seattle, I had to drop my concentration of paint from about 40% paint down to 20% paint. In addition to that, I had to use, of course, more thinner. But the two main reagents that made the big difference in getting this paint to behave, and I was shooting Mission, by the way, at the time. A lot of the guys were using Mission, and that was one of the things they wanted to see demonstrated. So Mission it was. And really what made the difference was when I started upping the amounts of Liquitex Flow Aid and Slow Dry in my mix. And it wasn't until I came up with a mix of 20% paint, 20% slow dry, 20% flow aid, and the balance of that thinner, that I started getting really nice, tight 1 millimeter wide lines with not a lot of stipple, above and below the line. Very, very nice. Almost like I was almost as good as I could get in Seattle. So the takeaway point there is, well, before I get to the takeaway point, let me just add to that. I had experienced something similar to this when my family and I, my job took me to Omaha, Nebraska for 6 years there at the Medical University of Nebraska. And again, my wife and I, having grown up in Florida, when the first Nebraska winter hit, we turned the heater up to 11. And we left it there, and we got all nice and toasty. And as you can imagine, the house got quite warm and quite arid. And I went up because my shop was in the attic, even warmer. And I started working, on a kit. I remember this was in the middle of winter. I hadn't, sprayed, used an airbrush in 6 or 7 months because the job was keeping me busy. But anyway, it behaved about like it did that day in Denver. And there the situation wasn't elevation as much as it was lack of humidity. I was trying to airbrush in a dry and arid area with very, very little humidity. And the paint was just dry because acrylic paints dry very fast, as you know. And the only thing that tamed the paint sufficiently in the dead winter of Omaha with the heat up to 11 was, again, 10 or 15% of flow aid and slow dry added to the thinner, slowed the paint down enough that the tip dry went away, the paint goobers went away, the finish got very nice and smooth, and I was able to do fine line work, again, as well as I can do now in sea level Seattle, there in the middle of winter in Omaha. But the formulation that it required was entirely different.
I do think that people don't appreciate how much more sensitive acrylics are to pressure and humidity than enamels or lacquers.
Exactly.
That while enamels and lacquers are certainly sensitive somewhat, it's a whole order of magnitude different if you're doing acrylics to be sensitive to both air pressure and humidity.
Yes, exactly right. The acrylics are super sensitive to arid conditions, to a lack of humidity, to partial pressure at elevation, way more so than enamels and lacquers. And it's interesting that when you trick them into behaving, appropriately, the drying time of acrylics increases. I mean, by the time you get 20% flow aid or 20% slow dry into your mix, that acrylic dry time of 45 minutes to an hour is going to be more like 2 or 3 or 4 hours. So
that's a great point.
So there's the downside. So if you're coming from my generation where you cut your teeth on enamels, which took sometimes days to dry, right?
Yeah.
The idea of saying, okay, I'm going to shoot color X, and before I go into color Y, I'm going to let it dry overnight. That's not a big deal for us because that's our generation. But if let's say you are living in Wyoming and it is the dead of winter and you really want to finish that A36, whatever, P51, whatever you're doing, you're going to want to think probably about adding some flow aid and some slow dry to your mix in order to get that paint to behave more like an enamel. But, eyes wide open, you're going to be looking at a longer dry time and a longer curing time when you add both of those reagents to the paint. So, and that's why I just not to get too tangentized, and not to speak ill of social media. Gosh, I'd never do that. But this is one of the reasons that I find it very frustrating to get on social media and answer questions about airbrushing, because I have lost track of how many social media conversations where you've got guy number one saying that the paint isn't behaving correctly, and guy number two is telling him, oh, you're doing it wrong because you're doing something wrong because when I do it the way it behaves perfectly, so clearly you're doing something wrong. And guy one is sitting on the coast of England, in a humid, in a human cool environment. And the guy that he's sparring with, that the paint is behaving differently, is sitting in Tucson, Arizona. And the paint's going to behave entirely differently between those two situations. And, again, not to get on my soapbox, but it just doesn't seem that kind of nuance to be able to explain, okay, it's going to work differently because of X, Y, and Z. Social media doesn't always lend itself to that kind of nuance. It's more of a black and white, do it this way kind of a medium.
Wait a minute. Are you suggesting social media is not nuanced and full of shades of gray in conversation?
No.
I mean, we're breaking news here. I think we need to get this out to the public.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm getting your ratings. I'm doing
there you go. You go. Breaking. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
Social media is not nuanced.
No, it is not. It is not. Like I said, I have lost track of watching these conversations. And again, one guy is in, let's say Denver, and he's having problems doing fine line, and he's arguing with a guy in Miami. Really? Yeah. So anyway, something to think about when for your readers, or excuse me, your listeners, when you're looking at social media and you're looking at some of these conversations, look at where these people are located geographically. And sometimes that can go a long way to explaining what they're dealing with. So that said, just give you a quick primer on how to use these two reagents. If you are dealing with tip dry, the brush just has a lot of dry paint at that nozzle needle interface. You get the goobers building up, the brush is clogging, spitting. If you have that issue, if you have a dry pebbly overspray, either when you're shooting primers or paints, you're going to want to think about maybe putting some slow aid and flow aid and slow dry in there. That'll take care of that pebbly overspray. If you're shooting paint at an elevated elevation, like in Denver or someplace in the mountains like that, or if you're sitting in Texas in the middle of the summer with no humidity and high heat, or if you're in Omaha, Nebraska in the middle of the winter with the heater to 11 and high heat and no humidity, those are the conditions where you're going to want to say, if I'm going to shoot acrylic paints and I want to make them behave more like an enamel, I'm going to have to think about adding Liquitex Flow Aid and Slow Dry. And the easiest way to do it, a lot of guys like to count by drops, and that's fine. And you can add both of those reagents to your paint cup. So you can mix your acrylic paint up the way you normally mix it up, and have your Flow Aid and your Slow Dry ready to go right next to your brush. And if you're shooting a 2 mil paint cup, like most airbrushes have, anywhere between 2 to 4 drops of each in your paint cup will get you to about 5 to 10% by volume, which is where you want to be. If you're shooting a 5 mil paint cup, do your mix the same way, put it in the cup. Be thinking about adding anywhere between 3 to 6, maybe 4 to 8 drops of Liquitex Flow Aid and Slow Dry to your 5 mil cup. So that's an easy way of just adding it by drop to the paint cup after you mix your paint. An easier and more reproducible and reliable way to do it is to add it to your acrylic thinner ahead of time. And I usually use one of 3 recipes, and they're all very straightforward and simple. 5 and 5, which would be 5% Liquitex Flow Aid and 5% Slow Dry by volume. I mix that up in a large bulk bottle, and the stuff never goes bad. Have it on my shelf. Whenever I'm ready to shoot my paint or mix my paint, I pick my bottle of thinner. It's already got the Flow Aid and Slow Dry in it. So 5 and 5, or 10 and 10, which would be 10% Slow Dry, 10% Flow Aid, or 20-20. Again, Flow Aid and Slow Dry. If you are in one of those situations where it is an arid, hot, possibly an elevated situation, you're going to want to be thinking more about using 10 to 20% of each of those, versus if you're in a more humid, less hot environment, then you're going to be thinking about maybe using 5 to 10% of each one of those. And then lastly, if you're interested in using gloss acrylic or acrylic gloss coats, the Slow Dry in particular goes a long way to giving you a very, very nice gloss coat, and you can use it with any acrylic gloss. And if you think about it, the longer the paint, the gloss remains open, that is to say wet, the longer that gloss has to flow and move, the smoother and shinier it will become. So adding a little Slow Dry to your gloss goes a long way to getting that gloss even shinier. Keeping in mind, of course, on the back end of that, you're going to have more time invested in both allowing it to dry and allowing it to cure.
That's a great tip. I had not at all thought about that use of it. I just made a note in my bourbon notebook.
Yeah, another place real quick, another place that you're going to want to think about that is when you do fine line. Because as soon as you go to fine line, the ratio of air to paint changes drastically, right? You're putting out a lot more air than paint when you're shooting a fine line than when you're shooting a primer or a clear coat. Mm-hmm. And because of that ratio change, fine line gives you even more tip dry. So if I'm shooting, let's say I'm shooting Vallejo. My normal mix for Vallejo is 5 and 5. 5 Liquitex, 5 Slow Dry. That does most of my work. If I'm going to use Vallejo or Mission or Model Master or some other acrylic and go from general spraying to fine line, defined as 1 millimeter or less in width, then I'll go from a mixture using 5% Liquitex to 10 or 15% Liquitex. And I'll already have that percent made up in a bulk bottle on my bench. And that is my fine line mix. And upping both of those reagents, Flow Aid and Slow Dry, by 5%, let's say from 5 to 10, gives you a thinner that is going to give you less tip dry, less goobers, and kind of lends itself towards fine line work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I want to circle back to something you mentioned about halfway through the conversation that I don't think people pay enough attention to, which is air pressure settings. Yeah. I know modelers who don't even have an air pressure gauge on their compressor.
Right.
And I don't think people appreciate the role that air pressure plays in getting a good spray, whether you're doing a wider base coat or whether you're doing the fine line stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree more. And on my site, there's tips and tricks, airbrushing tips and tricks, volume 3. And it's matching the paint dilution, the tip size, and the air pressure to the job at hand. Because those are the 3 main variables you have, right? Tip size, paint dilution, and air pressure.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree with you more. Air pressure is critical. And, for general work, I'll usually have 12 to 15 pounds dialed in just for general work. And for general work, I'm going to be shooting a 0.2 to, a 0.3 millimeter tip. And then for fine line work, I'm going to drop that pressure down from 12 to 15 to somewhere around 10 to 12. But I also use an inline air valve on my brush, and I'll take that 10 or 12 pounds coming in and sometimes drop it down to 6 or 8 pounds, depending on how fine a line I want, right?
Yeah.
The opposite side of that spectrum is when you're shooting primers and clear coats. There, your nozzle size is going to be going up a little bit to 0.3, 0.4, 0.6. There, I'm going to be pushing my pressure up to 15 or 18 psi. With the slightly larger tip size, larger nozzle, you're going to want a little bit more pressure to get fine atomization and not get droplets forming, because that's how you ruin your fine finishes. You lose your atomization due to insufficient pressure.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good point. And again, I try to bring that out in the volume 3 of the tips and tricks, trying to correlate those 3 variables. Pressure is a real big one, though.
And that's a good point, by the way. He has all of this on his website, and it is definitely worth going and reading all of those things.
Appreciate that. In particular, that article, if you scroll to the bottom, what I tried to do at the bottom of the article is give you in picture form multiple different models of different sizes. And then in the corner of each picture, kind of a baseball score breakdown, if you will, of tip size, paint dilution, and air pressure. So you can see, for a 1/72nd scale, he used this size tip, this dilution, and this pressure to do that. But with this 1/48th, he used this set, and it's going to be different.
Well, John, let's get on to our main topic tonight, which is one we've had some requests for, and it's all about your take on decaling.
You mean decals?
Decals. Well,
that's right.
Whatever geography you're from.
I will tell you, I the first time I ever heard them referred to as decals was when I was in Canada, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then I figured out, they mean decals.
Potato spud. What are you going to do?
Exactly.
But yeah, decals, the bane of many modelers' existence, and a hurdle that I think everybody has to clear at some time in their modeling, career. If you're gonna, do the work that you want to do. Where do you want to start?
I guess there's the perennial debate about gloss coats before or not needed, are needed or not needed, versus a smooth coat of paint versus a not smooth coat of paint. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious what the John Miller take is on your process and what works for you.
Well, I've kind of gone the full spectrum. There was a time when I wanted the uber 10-foot deep gloss coat prior to putting my decals on, and I did that for years. And then I became a bit more adept at using decal solvents. And in my latter years, I've kind of switched from going for a finish that's super glossy versus one that is glossy. It's smooth, but more importantly, it's chemically stable. And for me, there was a big difference between the two.
You're going to have to explain the difference between smooth and chemically stable for those of us lawyers who don't have any of that science background?
Well, so for years I was an aqua gloss guy, right, or future floor wax, and just as an aside for the folks out there shooting future floor wax, I find that if you take the old Model Master acrylic thinner or Vallejo acrylic thinner, and you dilute your future floor wax by about 30% with either of those acrylic thinners, both of them have just enough alcohol in them that they break the surface tension of the future, and it shoots way nicer, way easier to get a gloss coat.
Okay, I've got to grab my notebook now. That's another great tip, because I shoot future a lot.
Yeah, I did too for years, and I was pretty pleased with the results I was getting with it. But if you've used future, you know that there are some downsides to it. If you use set and sol, and either one of those sit on a dried coat of future too long, the future turns milky white. And if you're silly enough to try to push down on the decal while it's milky white, well, you know what happens.
Yes, that's a bad thing. If you leave it, it goes away. But if you push on the decal, you have a problem.
You're entering a world of pain. Yes. And it's just not worth going there. So, that's what I mean by, going for a gloss coat that is super, super glossy, because I could get future, pretty shiny, but it's not the most chemically stable gloss there is. If you're lucky and you're using some, really high quality aftermarket decals that are super, super thin and don't require a lot of microset or microsol, then future is probably going to be fine. If you're doing an Eastern European kit or a kit that's 30 years old and the decals are, so thick you can see the carrier film by your naked eye, and you're going to be using a lot of set and sol in order to get those decals to sit, to sit, then maybe a super gloss but slightly fragile coat is not what you want to go for. So I tried multiple gloss coats. The one I'm using right now, and I've talked about it before, is a Mission Clear Primer. And that is basically polyurethane, based paint. And I take their clear primer and I dilute it to 30% in Mission Thinner. So I'll do 30% clear primer, 50% Mission Thinner, 10% Liquitex Flow Aid, and 10% Liquitex Slow Dry. So it's 30% clear primer, 10 and 10, Slow Dry and Flow Aid, and the balance Mission Thinner. That is pretty much the only thing I use these days for a clear coat preparatory to decaling. And again, since it's polyurethane based, once it cures, it is very, very, very tenacious. It is not anywhere near as glossy as is the old aqua gloss or, a pure gloss coat. But again, once it's cured, it is very chemically stable. That is to say that you can use set, you can use sol, you can let them, sit on the model for a long, protracted time, and the coat doesn't turn white or milky. It doesn't begin breaking down. It is very chemically inert, very chemically stable.
If you back up at it to, one step higher in level of what we're talking about here, so you still put a clear coat on before your decals?
I most certainly always do. I always put a clear coat on before I decal, almost always. And again, for me, since I know I'm going to be using set and sol, I want to be sure that I use a clear coat that is going to be chemically stable and not break down with a set and sol. And for me, I've had very good luck with Mission Clear Primer, in their thinner. I've also used most recently used I just wanted to, experiment with it and see how it handles. I gave the AK Gloss diluted in their Nitro Thinner a try. And that stuff works absolutely beautiful. So that's another option for you. I used both set and sol on that gloss, and it was very, very stable. So I guess what I'm saying is if you're going to use set and sol, you don't have to necessarily worry about getting a super, super gloss coat. You can make do with a semi-matte. You can make do with a semi-gloss. That's perfectly fine if you're going to be using decal solvents.
I guess my question would be that there's a convention among pretty large swath of the hobby right now that says this gloss coat before decals is not really even necessary if your base coat is sufficiently smooth to begin with.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And that's irrespective of flat versus gloss finishes.
I would agree with that too if it's smooth enough. For instance, sometimes if I'm shooting mission acrylic, I will I almost always dilute my mission acrylic in CP30. And once that CP30 is cured for 1 to 2 days, you can go right on top of that with decal solvents with no problem.
Cool.
Yeah. So again, for me, it's chemical stability. And, that makes the difference because, again, I've tried Solvaset. I've probably tried most of the same decal solvents that you've tried. The two that work best are, the old standards of Microset and Microsol. And I've been using those for 20 years, but solely for about the last 5 years. I've just focused on Set and Sol, and they work really well as long as you have a stable, chemically inert, finish to work on. So for me, let's go ahead and get to the decaling. So for me, I do use a clear coat. If the finish isn't sufficiently smooth, I will clear coat it. If the finish is smooth enough without a clear coat, I'll go without it. The first thing I do when I'm putting my decals on is there really is a difference between using cold water and hot water. And decals usually behave way better with nice warm water, not cold water. So first thing I'll do is I'll get my coffee mug, put it on my little warmer there, get some warm water in there. I will prep the area with Microset, and I use a micro brush, and I'll put just enough Microset there to wet the area. I'll take the decal off the film or off the carrier paper. I will ever so carefully touch it to a chem wipe to remove as much of the water from the decal as I can. And then I will place it on top of the Microset. Maybe put a little bit more Microset around the decal so it's nice and blended in. And then I let that sit under a white light so it's got some heat on it. But I'll let that sit for anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes until the Microset begins to evaporate off. And then I'll put another round of Microset on, go do something else while I'm decaling, of course, and all the while keeping an eye on that decal. Again, 5, 10, 15 minutes later, most of that set has evaporated off. I'll put more set on. I'll probably do 5 or 6 rounds of Microset until I begin to see the decal start to set into the finish as the Microset dries. But here's we're reaching the inflection point, if you will, in using Set and Sol. And that is, once the decal starts to set down onto the finish and you start seeing the underlying detail coming up, through the decal. So the decal is getting softer and it's starting to sit down. There comes that point where you're going to want to let the decal get dry enough so that you can switch to Microsol. If you go too early and you hit it with Microsol too early, the decal will wrinkle up real badly. And sometimes those wrinkles don't go away.
Yeah.
And I did that for years. I never could figure out what my problem was. Why would those wrinkles go away on some decals and not others? And by trial and error, what I learned was spend more time using the Microset phase. In fact, there are some decals that will respond just to Set, and you never have to even go to Sol.
And whatever you do, if you see a decal wrinkling, don't touch it.
Don't touch it.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Let it dry.
Another thing you can do is you're about to start your decaling. You take that decal sheet, find a decal you're not going to use for the particular scheme that you're doing, and go to your paint mule or go to your sheet of styrene, which has been primed and painted at the same time that the model has. And I always do that. I'm doing the Arma Hobby P51B Razorback right now.
Impressive kit.
Oh, it's a gorgeous kit. And I've got a little sheet of styrene that has received every paint treatment that the Mustang has, from cleaning through primer to various layers of paint. That is my real-time paint mule, I call it. So now when it comes time to put my decals on, if I'm worried about how the finish on my model is going to react to my decal solvents, I can now test it on my mule before I test it on my model. And as long as your mule is painted at the exact same time that your model is, with the exact same paints, it'll behave the same way. So I'll take my mule, I'll take a decal that I'm not going to be using off the sheet, and then I'll sit down with my various solvents and figure out, is this decal one that is just going to be responsive to just set, which many of them are. They'll go right down with just set and no sol is required. Or is this one of the decals that will have to require both set and sol? And I'll figure that out before I actually go to start decaling the model.
Back to the water temperature thing. For me, in my experience, I got most of my decaling experience not on the military models I build, but I was decorating rail cars by the scores for a number of years. And in fact, I've got a whole clinic I put together for the local NMRA chapter here. I'd put on years ago and talk about a lot of this stuff. But I think that for my experience, and you can maybe talk about some other advantages if there are any. But the warm water, I think the big thing is it reacts with the kind of the cornstarch based adhesive on these decals faster than cold water.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it's kind of the same mechanism. It gets most of it gone away because I really don't like any of that stuff around, because that's the glue they give me is not what's attaching that to my model.
No,
it's the intimate contact and the disillusion of the film into the paint finish. That's your bond, and not this glue they've given you to stick it on there with. So,
yeah,
because I think that stuff sometimes it can stain and create some goofy kind of sheen differences when that stuff floats all over the place. And I really like most of that decal adhesive that's inherent to the carrier film and the backing sheet to go away completely.
So I'm sure you've seen an old decal sheet. I've done this before. I'm building an old kit. And you put the decal in water, and you can see that the adhesive turn milky white underneath the decal.
Yes.
Yep.
And that decal is by no means ruined, because with a little bit of care and some patience and some Q-tips and a gentle touch, you can scrape that adhesive off the back of the decal with a Q-tip, and then put it right back on the model and get a perfectly fine decal out of it, as long as you get that adhesive out of the way.
John, you mentioned you're a man after my own heart. Microsol and Microset are probably my two go-to setting solutions.
Yeah, I got one more, but yeah.
However, being the guy I am, I have everything from the Mr. Color line, the Mr. Hobby setters, to the Tamiya setters, to the Daco product setters, to Solvaset.
Yep.
What, other than Microsol and Microset, what else do you resort to, and when do you resort to it?
AK decal adapter.
Oh, we're going to have to get some AK decal money. AK money.
Yeah.
They're going to have to pony up on this. So
yeah. AK decal adapter. So that's what I'm down to is like you. I went the Solvaset route. I tried that. It seems like everybody and his brother has a decal solvent out, and I'm like you. I have a shelf full of them, and I've tried all of them, but I've settled on Microset and Sol. And real quick, if we could get back to the set and the Sol. Once you back to the example I was talking about, once you switch from set to Sol, that's when you start to see that carrier film dissolve. It is at the sol stage.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm always going for. I'm going for, that point where when you're done and you rotate the model under light, you can basically only see the decal and the carrier film is just gone. That's what I'm looking for. Now, with regards to how much time, and this is something else that I've discussed with, modeling friends here in Seattle, I put a huge amount of time into decaling. I'm not a very fast decaler at all. By the time I go 4 or 5 rounds of micro set and then let the decal dry down so I can switch into micro sol and dissolve the carrier film, that'll probably go for another 3 or 4 rounds of sol. I'm usually into decaling at least 3 to 4 hours per session. It is the most time-consuming aspect of modeling for me is decaling.
That raises an issue that and I'm the same way. Decaling takes long. Do you decal only horizontal to the plane of gravity?
Horizontal to the plane of gravity.
Yes. In other words, the model has to be like if I'm putting the decals on the top wings.
Yes.
The plane is sitting up with and then when I'm going to put them on the side of the fuselage, I rotate the airplane 90 degrees to put the decals on one side.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that because a big part of my decaling rig are various jigs that I have built for this very reason, so that especially I do a lot of aircraft, so I'm doing a lot of the sides of fuselages. And so gravity is 90 degrees to the plane that the decal is on. I always because if not, of course, you run into a situation where the bottom quote of the decal gets more solvent than the top of the decal.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I've got 4 or 5 jigs that I use to always maintain the decal in a straight up, if you will, orientation. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. That's an important point. That, and again, I don't even start decaling unless I have 3 to 4 hours of uninterrupted time that I can devote to it.
I have that same problem. That decaling is not something that I can do 30 minutes at a time.
Nope. So if I go through set, I go through sol, I come back the next day and there's an area not sitting down, or there's a little bit of some bubbles or whatever the problem is. That's when I will switch to the AK decal adapter. And you guys remember Aliens, right? The movie?
Yeah.
Do you remember the alien blood?
Yeah, it's acid. It burns through everything.
That's what's in AK decal adapter.
Okay, now I have to make a note. I now have to get some AK decal adapter.
That stuff is horrendously strong. So I use it I take a small brush and I'll paint it on the decal where the problem is, and I'll have a moist Q-tip waiting to go to take it off.
I mean, stronger than Solvaset, because that was always the reputation.
In my reputation, this is stronger than Solvaset. I'm telling you, it's like Alien. Yeah, the first time I used it, I went right through the paint, right through my clear coat, right through the paint, because I left it on too long thinking, it's like a solvent, right? No. So you put it on and you take it off. But this stuff will make a decal, just like it says, adapt to whatever the underlying surface is.
I'm going to have to try some of that stuff.
I'm looking at my bottle right here. I was just using it a couple of days ago. And then I wanted to actually cycle back to something that you said earlier, and that is micro setter and micro softer.
Yeah.
Or setter and soften. Mr. Mark Setter and Mr. Mark Softer. So I spent years cussing out the decal designers at Tamiya. Years.
Yeah.
Because I was told, and it was common knowledge, I thought, that Tamiya decals just weren't usable. That's why God created the aftermarket decals, right?
Right. They're too thick. They're super glossy. They're too thick. They don't stick. All of those quote unquote Japanese decal problems.
Yep. And then I'm going to give a shout out to a Mr. John Cholinsky, who is a friend of mine here in Seattle, a master modeler. And I was complaining to him about this one day, and he looked at me and said, well, you need to use Mr. Softer and Mr. Setter. And I went, say what? And he said, oh, you come with me, newbie. And we were at Skyway Hobbies at the time, and he walked right over to the shelf. He grabbed 2 bottles. He says, you got to use these. And I was working on a Tamiya kit at the time. I went home that very day. I used Setter and Softer just like you would use Set and Sol. And I put the Mr. Softer, Mark Softer, where the decal would be. I put the decal down. I couldn't believe how all of a sudden, boom, this thick, Tamiya carrier film just started kind of dissolving away. The decal just started melting onto the plastic. I couldn't believe my eyes. And I waited, 30, 45 minutes. I switched to Mr. Mark Softer, and it just dissolved away just like it would if it was a microset and microsol. So for Tamiya decals, Mr. Mark Setter and Mr. Mark Softer work amazingly well.
Yep.
And they're the only 2 that work on Tamiya decals. I sat here at my bench one day for an hour just playing with Tamiya decals and various solvents. And I can't explain it, but the Tamiya decals work preferentially and quite well with those 2 reagents.
Which is either a sinister Japanese plot or there's some chemical explanation for it that we don't particularly understand.
Yeah. And, they look wildly different than microset and microsol. I'm looking at Mr. Setter right now, and it has a white powder-like precipitant in the bottom of the bottle. Yep. And that's how it is brand new.
Yep.
And the Softer, Mr. Mark Softer, is completely clear, but the Setter's nowhere near like the microset is. So anyway, yeah, clearly the chemistries are wildly different. But if you are committed to using those Tamiya decals, these 2 reagents really will give you phenomenal results, and you use them about the same way as Set and Sol.
I've heard exactly that same thing.
Yep. So now cycling back to our decals. So now if we've gone through microsol, and we had some issues, and I used the AK decal adapter Alien Blood, and I have it stuck down on there. I'm a firm believer in shooting a clear coat over the decals prior to starting my weathering step. And the reason I do that is 2 reasons. Number one, you can kind of blend in that little ridge that sometimes is left where the decal is proud above the surface of the model. The other reason, though, is I'm very fond of enamel panel liners. And you do have to be worried that there are some types of decals that are affected by enamel panel liners.
Agreed.
That's one more reason to cover your decals before you go to your enamel panel liner. But just to digress briefly, and I'm going to give another shout out now to Eric Christensen, who's president of IPMS Seattle. He gives a great talk on the use of clear coats after decaling, but preparatory to weathering. And his thing is keeping the texture of that finish coat in mind that you want in order to do the weathering, that you're aiming for. So I used to shoot gloss before I did my decal, put my decal down, sealed it with gloss, and then I go into my weathering steps. But then I started doing armor. And for the weathering step, I wanted to go into pastels, or I wanted to work with weathering pigments. Well, you guys know these things don't work at all on gloss coats.
Gloss, right.
And I spent way too many evenings trying to get these things to smear on a gloss coat until I was, again, that's what's so great about IPMS, membership. I'm sitting in this meeting, and here's the prez giving his presentation, and he just says, and you switch to a matte gloss coat so you got the friction for your pigments. It's like, God, that's so simple.
Well, and the same thing goes, I've become enamored with the AK watercolor pencils, and the exact same thing applies. If you do them over a gloss coat, they don't work, just simply because there's no tooth. Whereas if you're working over a matte or a semi-matte, that is where you get enough tooth for the weathering, the watercolor pencils to work.
Exactly right. And it's funny you bring those up, because I too have kind of fallen in love with those AK weathering pencils. They are awesome.
Yes,
and
they are.
They do need some friction with the substrate in order to that you're using them on, in order for them to work well. So back to the decaling. Now when I'm ready to seal my decal, I'll think ahead to the scheme that I'm aiming for. And if it's a scheme that's going to incorporate a fair amount of weathering, well, then I'll go from that gloss to maybe a semi-matte or a matte in order to see my decals in, and at the same time prep for the next weathering step, a 2-for-1. And that's about it for me for decals.
I was going to ask if there was anything you did, because there's, again, this harkens back to my rail car finishing days, and it's less so now with the military kits, I think, but in that world, you had two types of decals. You had decals that had spot printed clear film on them. And what I mean by that is there was a patch of carrier film that was roughly the same shape of the decal image, but it didn't cover the entire sheet. And then you had a sheet that was printed over an entire piece of clear film.
Yep.
Edge to edge.
Yep.
And things I learned when working with those two different things was, particularly the ones that were a solid sheet of carrier film, was if you didn't want the edges of those decals to show, you had to be real careful and deliberate about how you cut them out of the sheet.
So if I could jump in there, when I was just doing those a model or two back, one big giant continuous piece of carrier film, and I was reminded of, because I hadn't used those decals like that in a long time. And as you probably know, the trick there is not to cut all the way through the paper.
Right. That is.
So I go to like a super sharp surgical scalpel.
Yes.
I'll just score it.
Just enough to break the carrier film.
Just enough. I mean, not even go halfway through the paper. Just score the carrier film ever so gently. Yep.
Yeah, I think that technique's highlighted in one of Paul Budzik's videos as well. Another thing I think some people don't realize, if you're using scissors to cut those out.
Yeah.
Most scissors are set up for right-handed people.
Yep.
And if you're left-handed and you use a pair of right-handed scissors in your left hand and you cut decals out of a sheet like that, the blade that's coming down versus the one that's coming up is the opposite.
Yes.
Than it would be. And you end up putting a curl in the upward direction if you're using the scissors in the wrong hand.
Oh.
And it's very nuanced little tricks, but if you really want that film to go away completely, you got to be mindful, I think, of all the little things, like how you cut it out of the film and what kind of surface you apply it over and what solvents you use. And one more thing, again, from those days is, I'll be curious to your opinion on this one, because you mentioned a little bit, but based on what your next weathering step might be, what kind of finish you put over the decals. But I found some decals have a glossy finish to them naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And some brands, not so much anymore, but a lot of the older brands sometimes had a matte finish to them.
Mm-hmm.
If you applied a matte finish decal over a semi-gloss paint, set it all down with whatever you're using, and then went straight to a flat finish over that, the paint and the decal were never going to match.
No.
You had to unify that with a gloss or semi-gloss finish. That's my experience.
No, you're right. You're right.
To make that work.
That's a really good point. So if after I'm done decaling, and that's an awesome point. If after I'm done decaling and there is a large contrast between the finish of the model and the finish of the decal, that's one instance there where you're going to want to pick your clear coat, pick your clear coat in order to affect that differential as much as you can, because you don't want those decals to be 10 times shinier than the background, even if there isn't any carrier film there.
That's right.
Yeah. So one last little tidbit, and it's I'm kind of hesitant to bring it up because we talked about using set and sol, but we didn't talk about pressing the decal down onto the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not anything that I do very often. And I'll tell you, if I have moved to the sol stage, I hardly ever push a decal down on the surface, because if you've gone to the sol stage, to push it down at that point, you're kind of inviting disaster, at least in my hands.
Wrinkles.
Yes, wrinkles. But if you're still at the set stage, and for some reason the decal just isn't going down the way you want it to, I have found that a Chem wipe, and keep in mind Chem wipes are lint free, so you're not going to be putting any lint into the decal. But I'll take a Chem wipe and I'll fold it into like a little 1-inch square piece of paper, and I'll moisten that with a little bit of water, and I will use that to press the decals down into place only during the set stage of the decaling process. And for some recalcitrant decals, a little pressure with a Chem wipe goes a long way to setting them in place.
All decals are eventually recalcitrant at some point.
It's true. It's so true. And I try not to touch them, as we discussed, but every once in a while, that trick will give good results and not end up ruining the decal. But again, only during the set stage, not the sol stage.
Well, this has all been great, and I'm sure we'll get some listener feedback from this one, because everybody's got their own voodoo magic they use on decals.
Isn't it the truth?
Yeah, can't wait.
I think so, and I think this is kind of a precursor to this clear coat discussion we want to have in the future. So
yeah. Let's take clear coats on. That's one that I get a lot of emails about. Everything from glosses to semis to mattes to flats.
And then we have to have a whole nother discussion about stencils rather than decals, but that's for a future episode.
Love stencils. Yep. Count me in.
You got it.
Well, we're going to, because I think we're going to be try to be a little bit more regular, a little bit more deliberate about this going forward. So
that sounds good, guys. Keep me in the loop, and I'll be here.
You got it. Well, John, thanks again for joining us at Plastic Model Mojo and giving us your insight and wisdom and experiences into these various processes. And thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, guys. You have a good one.
You too. All right, thank you.
Bye.
Well, Dave, Dr. Strangebrush always has something interesting to say, and always something to learn.
I learned a lot from that session with John. Every time I interact with him, I learn something. And you know what? You can't ask for more in modeling than that. So, I was really pleased. So I've got some notes made, and I can't wait to try some of this stuff out.
Well, it's kind of we mentioned it in that segment, but we're going to try to get a little more formal with John and have him on a little more regular. And, if there's topics folks want to hear, I know we're going to talk about clear coats sometime soon. And we'll see where it goes after that. But if somebody's got an idea of something they want to hear about, send it to either John or us, and we'll make sure that can happen.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Dave, we've kind of got a little different episode this time, because we knew the interview with John would go kind of long. And the other thing is, in years past, we've done a little contemplating on our modeling year as it unfolds in front of us. And some of the other podcasts have done it, and I think we ought to do it too, but maybe not like we did it last year. We've all got hopes and aspirations for this new modeling season. And I don't know, let's talk about that a little bit.
You got it.
What do you hope to get out of 2022 for your own modeling?
Several things. One, complete some projects. After a really good 2020, 2021 was kind of embarrassing, but I have a lot of models that are really, really close to being finished. And all of those need to be finished probably in the first quarter of 2022. If I can do that, then that sets me up to complete some, or to do some other projects that I wanted to do. I've been thinking a lot about what I'm interested in and why I am not modeling in the areas I'm interested in. Part of it is that waiting till I get better stuff, which is stupid. So I hope to, after I get everything cleared off the bench in the first quarter 2022, I hope to complete a Shelf Queen, one of the ones sitting on the shelf. I hope to finish a Japanese World War II, start and finish Japanese World War II aircraft, because that's one of my major areas of interest. And hope to, I want to do another Airfix MiG-17, start to do one that's not just out of the box, but start improving it and figuring out, okay, this is the best MiG-17 kit we've got. It's not perfect. What can I do to make it better? And that's going to be incremental. It's not all going to come in one build. So I really want to do all of those things. But I also want to I don't want to restrict myself. So if something strikes my fancy, I want to try that too. I do want to work, these AK weathering pencils really interest me. And I think they're really, really useful. So that's something that I'm going to concentrate on. I am also going to get this M30 done, I am going to work on chipping and sponge chipping and paintbrush chipping. So if I end up at the end of this year with 5 or 6 completed models, I'm going to consider it a successful year. How about you?
Oh man, I think productivity is at the top of the list. I got to get some stuff done. So again, I'm with you. I didn't finish a lot in 2020, but going back and looking, the little nostalgia build from Airfix was finished in 2020, not 2021. Yep. So I'm pretty much a goose this year.
Last year,
in the last year, right?
Unless you count those things that you did for the ZIS as independent little modeling projects, which I think they count that way. And I do think if you're working on a larger project, really one of the ways to avoid getting bogged down and to get depressed by the fact that you haven't advanced the model as much as you want is to look back on those as successes, as little modeling projects unto themselves, because what you did with those shells and ammo crates really did advance your techniques and your skills. So I don't think you can be too hard on yourself for that.
I think you're right, but I'm not going to count them as finished projects. But I did learn a lot this past year, and hope to continue that. So, like you, I've got a lot that are close. The gun I should finish this year. The E16 I should finish this year.
Yep.
And that's the two. And I know I'm going to have to finish that Musaru Cup thing by March.
Right.
The second week of March. So that might be the first one I get done this year.
Yeah.
And then just outside of the projects that are on my bench right now, I just would like to move the needle a little bit on being more prolific, because
yes,
I get tired of talking about the same project every other week. And I'm sure our listeners are getting tired of me talking about the same projects every other week.
No, they love it.
There's more to do. There's more I want to do. So I got to figure all that out. That's
one of the things that I've got to figure out in that regard, and maybe you do too, is time management. Because I really do think that a big part of this whole issue is time management. I don't manage my time well.
And I think if I understand you correctly, you mean that as a kind of a global under the roof of your house kind of time management thing. Not
absolutely.
Not just your hobby time.
Not it. I mean it with the hobby time, but I mean it more generally as well. That yes, there's too much. I mean, okay, not to get modeling, not to get all of this. I'm 60 years old. I hope that I still have a lot left to me, but the one thing you can't buy more of is time. And all the time you spend staring at stuff, be it TV or whatever, and not being productive, you can't ever get that back. And so I'm trying to dedicate 2022 in part to better time management.
You know, there's projects I want to start. I'm not even going to commit to wanting to learn any particular skill, I don't think, because I think that'll come with these projects I've got planned.
Sure.
I just got to get to them. I don't know, man. We just got to get more stuff done for us and everybody listening.
Yeah. Hey, listen, that's why we started this podcast in the first place, to accountability, get some stuff done.
Well, we've talked about shows a little bit. What do you got? What are you thinking for hobby travel this year?
You and I need to figure this out. I've been kind of bugging you a little bit about this. We need to nail this down. I know we're going to go to Indy. I know we're going to go to the Nationals. We need to, A, nail those down, and then B, we need to figure out what else we're going to do. I know we're going to go to the, at least assuming that life doesn't intervene, the local Louisville show in September.
And I think we have our eyes on that Knoxville show too.
Yes. So that's at least 4. Okay. Indy, Nationals, Louisville, Knoxville.
And Cincinnati.
And Cincinnati, because we always get to Cincinnati because it's basically halfway between you and me. So that's 5. If we do those 5, that's great. I would love to see if we can wedge Heritage Con in, assuming that they actually hold it. The big problem, of course, for you and me is that it's on a Sunday, which is less than ideal. I'd love to get in other contests, but I don't know where we're going to fit them. I mean, at some point, my lovely, long-suffering spouse is going to object at some point, and rightly so. I mean, if I disappear every weekend or every other weekend to a modeling contest, 4 or 5 hours away, she has a complaint that's valid. So we kind of have to pick and choose our targets, but we also need to nail these down. So hopefully we're going to get them nailed down.
That's right. Well, I think 2 of them are. I think Nats is a done deal, and there was a lot of water going under the bridge. But I have full intent to go to that one, and Indy's a pretty easy one as well. So
yes, absolutely.
So, folks, we're going to be out there, out and about. So we hope to see you.
Yes, absolutely. When you go into a vendor's room and you see our table, please, if you see us, come talk to us, say hi, interact with us. If you've got suggestions for episodes, we'd love to hear that, because really whatever you're telling us you want to talk about is what we'd like to talk about.
And now our final bullet on this little discussion, Dave, is just new products or whatever. It could be kits, decals for you maybe.
I'm interested in getting a silhouette cutter.
You haven't bought that yet?
No, I have not bought that yet. They're feeding my children comes first. I don't know why. I mean, for some reason, my wife has an obsession with my children being fed and our pets being fed. I think it's silly, but hey, I got to defer at some point.
I guess I'm going to go back and listen to episode 55 again. See what you said about something about 24 hours.
There you go. But also, it is amazing the number of amazing new kits that have already been announced for 2022. The Focke-Wulf 190D series by IGB, the Arma P51 BCs, which apparently the first run of them have already sold out. The KI-21 Sallies that are coming out from Special Hobby and, oh God, I forget who else is doing them. It's Zvezda IBG, somebody. But in any event, there's a lot of great stuff already announced, and it's freaking the third week of January.
I know one you didn't mention. I bet you end up with
what?
Clear Prop and their Sukhoi 25.
Oh yes, okay, yeah, no question. Hopefully, we don't see those in combat sometime in the next week or two. So we're keeping our fingers crossed in that. But yes, that will definitely be a must buy. I've got a ton of models. I've mentioned in the last few episodes walking into the hobby shop and walking out without buying anything because, at least in part, I say to myself, well, you've got all this stuff you still need to build. There's a lot of stuff that's already been announced that I know I'm going to buy. I cannot imagine what 2022 is going to look like at the end of the year. You?
Well, I hope there's a couple more paint lines.
Okay. The one thing we do not need is another couple of paint lines. Okay. Stop it. Everybody stop it.
What's the over under on that?
Oh, I guarantee you there will be at least 2 new paint lines announced in the next 6 months. I'll put money down on it right now.
Oh, for products, I don't know, Dave.
You've got a darn lab where you have a lot of access to a lot of tools. Those gas mask hoses for the Russian gas masks, those things are amazing. And I expect that that's not the last thing we're going to see from you on those projects.
No, it's not. I mean, I'm pleased with the way that came out, but
it really did come out nice. I was amazed at how good they looked.
I've griped in years past about no BT5 from Hobby Boss, and now, I can't remember his name, but he runs Hellcat Models, has been doing CAD work to do a 3D printed upper hull for the Hobby Boss BT2 to make a BT5. So I'll probably just get that instead of waiting for Hobby Boss to get it wrong.
Sure. And that the 3D print revolution, I really think that, I've been amazed in the past at some of the stuff that we're seeing in injection molding that I never thought I would see. And I do think that 3D printing is probably going to blow that out of the water. And you're going to see stuff that just will amaze you in 3D printing that you never thought you would ever see as a model.
And in generally, I'm kind of curious about where Mini Art's going with these Sturmgeschütz kits and their T-34 kits and all that. And I don't know. It's all exciting, man. It's a golden age still with no end in sight.
It is, truly. Truly. Absolutely.
Unlike this episode, which we need to have an end in sight, and I think we're getting pretty close to it, Dave.
So how was your Narragansett?
It was refreshing.
That's what you want from a beer, especially a lighter type beer. Again, like I said, I associate those with spring and summer, working outside, but that's what you want from one of those type of beers. Refreshing.
And your bourbon, sir?
You know what? Evan Williams helps cure COVID, particularly mixed with ginger ale and an ice ball. So, folks, if you're out there and you get COVID, drink some bourbon. Anytime you get any sort of medical condition, take a bourbon and call me in the morning.
It's at least a symptom suppressor for sure.
Exactly. Which is kind of the same thing.
Well, my beer's gone, Dave.
Good. Glad to hear it. So you got a shout out?
I do have some shout outs. First off, I'd like to thank all the recent additions to the ranks of the contributing. This episode, we've got Mr. Mike Bird, Hector Colon, John Bryan and Branson Smith, they've all contributed to Plastic Model Mojo through one of our 2 avenues to do that. Those avenues being Patreon. If you want to make a recurring contribution of any amount, you can go to www.patreon.com/Plastic Model Mojo, or just go to patreon.com and search for Plastic Model Mojo and their integrated search function there, and it'll let you set up a recurring contribution. If you'd like to do a one and done or manage your own kind of recurring thing, you can go to plasticmodelmojo.com, and there's a heart icon in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, which will take you to our PayPal link, which will let you make a one-time donation. You can go back and visit as many times as you want, or just once. Anything's appreciated. And folks, it's totally humbling. I can't believe it, really, that so many people think so much of us that they're willing to talk with their wallets and thank us with their wallets. And it's really greasing the skids for us to bring you another great season of Plastic Model Mojo. So thank you very much.
And I'd like to add my thanks as well. Again, I am, like Mike, humbled by the fact that anybody thinks that this is listening to Mike and I talk about modeling is something that they want to support. I'm thrilled with it, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And if you haven't, by the way, email plasticmodelmojo@gmail.com. If you're one of the contributors, either through PayPal or through Patreon, and you haven't emailed us to give us your information, your mailing address, your information. Again, we don't sell it. We're not giving it to anybody, but we'd like it personally, just simply so that we can express our appreciation to you, because you all are really doing something fantastic for us that we never expected. So thank you very much. I'd also like to make a shout out this episode to the members 72nd Scale Aircraft Forum. If you're not on it, go and look at it. If you build 72nd Scale aircraft, join. I help moderate it. It is a really great board for seeing and sharing information regarding 72nd scale modeling. I appreciate everybody who's joined recently and everybody who's contributed recently. So if you are interested in 72nd scale aircraft, go to Google 72nd Scale Aircraft Forum.com. You'll find us. Please join. I'll get you approved. I'll get you in, and you can start posting.
I've got one more.
Okay, go for it.
Jared Nuss from IPMS Tidewater in Williamsburg, Virginia, sent us a little gift.
Oh, Lord.
So I appreciate that, Jared, and I'm sure Dave will too once I get him his, and we'll do that hopefully this week. So
Friday.
So, Jared, thanks a lot, man. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Well, Mike, I think we're at the end here.
I think so, man. It's been an interesting ride with Dr. Miller and then all the listener mail. Fun times.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I hope folks enjoy this one, and hopefully the next one will be just as good. So, we're at the end here, and Mike, as they say, so many kits.
So little time, Dave. Take it easy and finish getting better, my friend.
You bet. I think I'm on the upside. You take care.